Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and this is our multi-tester review of the Suunto Race. So here's the key things you need to know about the Suunto Race. Let's start with price, and in the UK it's £389, $449 in the US. Now in terms of model options, you are getting the pick of stainless steel or titanium bezels, so a lot like the Suunto Vertical. Now going for the titanium version does push the price up, and that is the model that most of us in this video have tested. As I said, you are getting an AMOLED display here. Now Suunto has used an AMOLED display on its watch before, so if you remember the Suunto 7, which was Suunto's first kind of smartwatch that they did with Google and Wear OS, this is the first multisport premium sports watch from Suunto that now offers an AMOLED display, and it is a touchscreen display and one that you can keep always on. Alongside that AMOLED touchscreen display, you are getting 3 buttons. There's 2 flatter ones on the right side of the case, and that's kind of sandwiching a rotating twisting crown that will let you kind of navigate through the software. Now in terms of that software, Suunto has changed things up from previous watches, and it's really kind of cater for having that AMOLED display. So in terms of those standout running features, we are getting a lot of what we saw on the Suunto Vertical, and actually impressed us on the Suunto Vertical, which we have reviewed on the channel. So you are getting that dual band GPS support here. You are getting free offline maps, which is kind of synced over to the watch via the Suunto Companion phone app, and that has to be done over Wi-Fi. Along with giving you all the things we got on the Suunto Vertical, there's a little bit more on the training and analysis side of things. So the first thing that really stands out here is the kind of bigger emphasis on recovery, and there's now a HRV recovery insight, which requires 2 weeks of your sleep data. And from that, Suunto can then tell you when you should be recovering, when you should think about when you train, and basically ultimately a bit like what Garmin and Polar do is offer a bit more insight into, you know, the decisions you've been making about your training. There's also a new Suunto coach as well, and that's looking at things like training load to help again dictate how your training is going, what you should be doing about your training as well too, and really give the Suunto Race a bit more in terms of that training and analysis profile, and making it more useful outside of your tracking time. A bit like Coros and Polar, Suunto is pushing a little bit more on the smartwatch side of things. So it still doesn't quite live up to what you get on a Garmin watch, but you have a watch here that allows you to control music playing back on your phone, and also allows you to view notifications on the watch as well too. You do have access to Suunto's kind of Plus store, which gives you access to kind of third-party apps, so you do have a quite extensive third-party app support there as well too if you want that. But ultimately you're getting a more simplified smartwatch experience, but with that added AMOLED display you are getting a little bit more than we've seen previously on a smartwatch front from Suunto's watches. Last and by no means least is battery life, and the good news is Suunto is talking some pretty good numbers here. Now if you're looking at day-to-day and kind of using it as a smartwatch and some tracking in general, you can expect up to 12 days. Now that's not factoring in having the screen set to always on, which will see it drop below that kind of quoted 12 days. There's also a very basic watch mode as well, which gives you up to 26 days, but obviously that will restrict the kind of features and what you can use on the Suunto Race. Now we're talking GPS battery performance. At that kind of top GPS accuracy mode, you can expect 40 hours of GPS battery life. That can max out at 120 hours, and obviously you will sacrifice having that supreme accuracy to have that longer battery life. So some impressive battery numbers to go with some very good features at a very good price. Now, does the Suunto Race deliver the goods? Let's find out.
So there's an awful lot to like about the Suunto Race, I'd say, but I will start with the design, which I think is good. It's a really nice looking watch with that kind of etching on the bezel around the watch, the buttons, and the screen obviously is nice and bright. It's maybe not the best AMOLED screen out there. I think the brightness on the Polar Vantage V3 I think is a little better for one, but it is a nice screen, and what Suunto has done with materials I think is really impressive. You've got the sapphire crystal display, you've got a titanium model, which is the one I tested, which is also nice and light, or a steel model at a very good price. That sapphire display in particular is great, because I have scratched the screen on the Forerunner 965 over the course of a trail run. Got that little bit of extra peace of mind with the stronger materials in the Suunto Race. At a price you don't often see those materials. Second like is the GPS, which has been absolutely outstanding. Throughout my testing I've been using the Suunto Race at the same time as the Polar Vantage V3 and a couple of Garmin's, the Epix Pro and the Forerunner 965. the Garmin's and the Suunto nearly always match up very closely, I think. And having had the Garmin, I think, as the gold standard for GPS accuracy in the last year or so with its multiband, the Suunto joins it right at the top of the tree. It's been pretty much immaculate for me in all conditions. So yeah, no problems with GPS. That multiband is as good as anything else out there. The battery life is also really solid for an AMOLED watch. Like, I've been getting for a week quite comfortably with the always on screen enable. If you want to enable race to wake, you'll get longer than that as well. And that's indicative of the trend we're seeing with these watches now. Like, you can get this really nice bright screen without really sacrificing battery life. Suunto also offers outstanding battery life for individual activities. So if you want just one activity with loads of multiband, the Suunto Race is going to last longer than any other AMOLED watch quite comfortably. I'll also say that the maps are great. It's a bit time consuming to download them to the watch through the wireless thing, so make sure you do that before you go anywhere, because it's going to be hard to do on hotel Wi-Fi. But once they're on the watch, they're really nice and clear and easy to read. And routes, I really like the way the blue arrow shows where you're heading next on the Suunto Race. It makes it really clear to follow routes, especially ones where you're doing sections where you'll overlap yourself, maybe going in different directions and that kind of thing. So yeah, big tick on the mapping front.
So the first thing I like about the Suunto Race is the design. Now, I feel like this is something Suunto has got right over the last few years, and that's prior to the Suunto Vertical. So I'm talking about things like the Suunto 9 Peak, where we were starting to see a bit more kind of focus on how these watches looked. The Suunto Race really continues that theme, and you know, it definitely has that kind of feeling of the Suunto Vertical. It definitely has that outdoor watch feel to it, and you compare it to the watches it's clearly aimed up against, so things like the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the Polar Vantage V3, it doesn't look like those watches, and I quite like that. It's got a distinctive look about it. I like this big showy bezel. You're getting a little bit more protection in terms of what you're getting on that screen as well. You're getting two options, so the stainless steel and the titanium version, and both of those watches do still come in at less than the competition as well too. So you're getting the kind of high quality design, a very distinctive design as well. The AMOLED display, which definitely elevates the look and feel of using the Suunto Race day to day. And also, like the Vantage V3, you've got a very easy to remove strap as well too. So if you don't absolutely love the strap, and to be honest, it's, you know, been absolutely fine for me, it is easy to take it away. Whereas you look at something like the Garmin Forerunner 965, you need to kind of fiddle around with a kind of tool to kind of remove it from the case. But with the Suunto Race, it's a lot easier to do. So the other thing I really like is the software. Now, I don't absolutely love everything about the software, but I think, you know, bringing in that AMOLED display has meant, and a bit like what we've seen in the competition, when you kind of embrace that AMOLED display, you have to rethink how the UI works, because you're putting more reliance in terms of the touchscreen and using that kind of touchscreen functionality. Now, I've always found that a bit of a weakness on Suunto's watches in general. On the Suunto Race, it's definitely a step in the right direction in terms of just how things are organised, just where things live, just kind of getting around to the sports tracking. For me, the user interface has been a massive improvement in terms of what we've seen from Suunto's watches previously. So that is definitely a tick box for me. The last thing I'd say, and there's been a lot of things that I've really liked about the Suunto Race, but really retaining the kind of core kind of running performance or run tracking performance that we got on the Suunto Vertical, which is really where I think things have changed in terms of Suunto and in terms of where it's been going, and really getting back on track in terms of delivering a good, strong alternative to Coros, Polar, and of course Garmin as well too. Now, it has that dual band mode like the Suunto Vertical, and for me it has performed really, really well. I've been using the Forerunner 965 and the Polar Vantage V3 all together for quite a few runs as well too. What I found is this has been closest to the Garmin Forerunner 965 and that kind of multi-band, dual band mode that Garmin offers, which is up there with the best, I think, in terms of what I've experienced with the Suunto Vertical. Also in terms of the Apple Watch Ultra as well too, in terms of that dual band mode. And I think it's in good company with those kind of top level dual band kind of performances that I've seen. So that is definitely a massive plus. The other thing I would say is the kind of general kind of mapping support that you're getting here. Now, we saw it on the Suunto Vertical. Now it's a bit cumbersome in terms of getting those maps and what you want in terms of the mapping support on the Suunto Race, but ultimately when it is on there, you've got that nice AMOLED display on there to really make the most of that mapping support. And if that's something that you've been looking for, and that is a really strong kind of level of support here that you're getting here on the Suunto Race. Love the design. I think the UI, the user interface in general, is a step in the right direction, and it has really kind of impressed me in terms of what we've seen previously on Suunto watches, and also just that core run tracking performance. The GPS is good, the kind of metrics are kind of associated with it, And kind of the added things like mapping are real nice added features here, especially when you consider how much this watch kind of costs and it compares to other watches it's clearly up against.
I'll start with my likes. This has a really big, really bright AMOLED screen. It feels very similar in size and brightness to the Garmin Forerunner 965. This is a lot cheaper. This is 389, which is around the same price as the 265. So you're getting a lot for your money in terms of screen. It didn't feel too big on my wrist. Anyone who's watched any video I've made about running watch before will know I don't love a massive watch. I find that it digs in when I'm not running, when I'm working, and when I'm sleeping. I didn't have any problems with this watch and it fit really nicely. The thing I liked was the battery life. I've been testing this watch and I haven't really had to charge it all that much. You're getting a really good battery life and a really bright screen for a really low price. The price is super competitive here. My final thing that I did like, and I was impressed by, and this is something if you're comparing this to the Garmin Forerunner 265 to really note, is the offline mapping is great. It was super, it took a while, definitely took a while, but once I'd uploaded the maps onto the watch, it was super easy to follow maps when I was using the watch. There was a really clear kind of blue arrow. I think sometimes it's quite difficult on a watch, even with a screen as big as this, it's difficult on a watch to really see, when do I need to turn left? I didn't have that problem here. It was really easy to follow mapping, and the fact the screen was bright and colourful made that even better.
So I've had the Suunto Race on my wrist for a good month now, and it's safe to say that this is the best Suunto watch I've tested in a long time. It might actually be Suunto's best watch ever. I tested the Suunto Race Titanium Edition, which is the pricier and heavier version. And I said it in our first run video, and after longer testing it's still very true. Overall, this is a slick, well-designed watch where the hero really is the big AMOLED screen, but I think the titanium bezel looks smart. It's still got some of that adventure edge that you get with the Suunto, but it looks a little bit more slicker for everyday use as well now. Now, I hailed the screen on our Polar Vantage V3 review, and it's a similar story here. The big AMOLED display gets a massive thumbs up for me, though it would be much better on the Suunto if it didn't have this bezel around the edge of the screen. Not the titanium bezel, but the inner one. But it's a big point of difference against the Coros, which Suunto needed, and when it's whacked up full, the screen is notably brighter and punchier than the Polar V3. It's a big step forward for Suunto when it comes to display quality, and elevates the maps and navigation and makes digesting your run data a whole lot more pleasant visual affair. Now, for an AMOLED watch, the battery life is also pretty good, particularly in max accuracy dual frequency GPS mode. In my tests, a 1 hour run using that highest accuracy GPS mode burned just an average of 3%. That's draining faster than the 40 hours that Suunto claims this will last, but it matched the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the Polar Vantage V3 when they were also in their respective max accuracy modes. And despite that big AMOLED screen, the daily usage burn was also around 4 to 5%. Without training, and that's with the always on screen switched off. Overnight, the Suunto Race was even stingier. It burnt just 2% on average with all the tracking switched on. That included blood oxygen, which usually torches the battery much faster on watches, so that was quite a surprise. So on staying power, based on my detailed tests, it's a match for the other big AMOLED rivals, and it's a thumbs up on battery life too. Now, in my tests in max accuracy mode, the accuracy of the GPS was also good. The dual band worked very reliably. It's been at least on par with the Polar Vantage V3 and the Forerunner 965, not just on the total distances, but also when you dig into those GPS traces and tracks to look at the maps. There's not too many stray traces from the Suunto through buildings, rivers, in places that shouldn't be. So that's also been a positive in my tests.
First dislike is the heart rate accuracy, which has been pretty much downright awful for me with the Suunto Race. Really rarely right during training. Actually, I think on the first run, one of the few runs I'd done there was spot on it, and I thought maybe it's gonna be okay. And pretty much since then, the heart rate accuracy has been terrible during workouts. It's also sometimes just noticeably wrong at rest. I'll go to the heart rate on the Suunto Race, and it'll just be too high. It's never so exaggeratedly too high that it makes a big difference, but it's just, yeah, not a very good heart rate sensor. By looking at it, it doesn't seem to have as many LEDs and diodes as you get on things like Polar and Garmin watches. So I wouldn't come to this watch expecting good heart rate accuracy. Some people might have it, but I think that's going to be rarer than the people who have problems with it. I would link a chest strap. That's usually the case. I think with sports watches, it's best to have a chest strap for that bit of peace of mind, but Garmin and Apple's watches are certainly better on the heart rate front. Also say that the user experience in general just lacks a little bit. It's not quite as good as in other watches. Suunto's not really made the most of this AMOLED screen in lots of ways. The widgets are nice, but the watch faces are a bit basic. You can't see them. Also, when you go into always on mode, you just get a vague time. You can't click through the widgets on the watch face to then see more information on those widgets, and there is a bit of lag on the race to wake. Now, it's not that bad anymore. Like early on, the Suunto Race was noticeably slower to wake on race to wake than the Garmin 965 or the Polar Vantage V3, and it is still slower than those watches, but not by much. It's not enough to annoy me, but I'm not that annoyed by this stuff. I also haven't really had any lag when scrolling through the menus. It's been responsive enough for me, but again, I think if you're someone who gets very annoyed by a microsecond of lag, I think it's probably slightly laggier than other watches. Something Suunto seems to be able to work on with software updates, so hopefully it'll get better over time, but yeah, it's not as fast to react as things like Garmin's watches, AMOLED screens, or certainly smartwatches like the Apple Watch. And Suunto's just a bit messy with the way it does stuff. It really winds me up for some reason that you can't customize existing sports modes. You have to create your own one if you want to get the stats. I can't customize the basic running mode. I have to create Nick's running mode to get the stats I want. And to turn on the music controls, I had to turn them on within an activity and then within the general settings to get those on the watch. It's a lot of slightly messy little stuff. Structured workouts are a bit of a pain. They have to be a guide. It's not a native feature. It's a lot of stuff that Suunto could work to fix, I think, and create a slicker overall experience. Just a few little minor annoyances will come up regularly when using the watch, I found. None of them are massive turn-offs compared to the good stuff it does, but it feels like it's stuff that could be fixed. You're also not really getting any smart features here beyond like a weather forecast and notifications. It's not a smartwatch. That's one area where Garmin is very clearly outstripping other sports watches. And then lastly, I've got a major problem, but hopefully not one that's going to repeat for lots of people. The Suunto Race did end 2 workouts just during my time testing it. And one was just a random yoga session, fine. And if the other one had been something like that, I probably wouldn't even mention it. But the other one where it stopped just in the middle of a workout was a race. I was doing a 10k race. It just stopped tracking just after the 5k mark, and it's like, okay, well, it's just you failed during the time I really wanted you to work well, and I've had to quickly restart the activity. And don't think it's a problem that's going to be widespread. It hasn't happened to me since. I've not seen it in other reviews, so I wouldn't really worry about it. But it just niggles at the back of your mind a little bit when something like that happens. So hopefully it's not something that happens to anyone else.
So into the dislikes, and the first thing I have to talk about, and I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk about it, is the laggy software. Now, this is something that I've experienced on Suunto watches previously. I hoped it would be fixed on the Suunto Race. And when I first had a look at this watch a few months ago, it was something I was a little bit concerned about, and whether when we had it in our hands, would it still have that same laggy feeling that I got when I first had a little play with it. And ultimately, it's still there, and it really puts it into context when I have been using the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the Polar Vantage V3 at the same time. The Polar Vantage V3, one of the big things about it is that kind of performance boost and improving the slickness of the software, and you definitely see that compared to the Vantage V2 from the V3. With the Suunto Race, now we saw this a little bit on the Suunto Vertical, where it just, when you're interacting with the day-to-day, you can't, at least for me, I can't help but not notice it, particularly when you see what other watches can kind of offer. Now, the other thing, and it's, this is not going to be a massive issue for everyone, but I've not found the sleep tracking very good. Now, I do like to track my sleep. In terms of what I've seen with the Suunto Race, it's just not been there in terms of the kind of tracking performance that I've seen, the accuracy, the reliability of the tracking. So if you're looking for this watch to be something that you can track your sleep, then it's not massively impressed me. And this kind of leads me into the other thing that I didn't absolutely love, which is Suunto made a big deal about the kind of delving in a bit more into the kind of recovery side of things. So it has that kind of HRV based recovery insights, which is a little bit like HRV status on the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the latest Garmin watches in general. And Polar has kind of offered something similar in terms of its recovery features as well too, and really relying on that heart rate variability information to kind of drill into that data and give you kind of better insights and help you decide on what you should be doing in terms of your training time. Now, for me, I think it's a bit like HRV status, where in isolation it doesn't feel that massively useful. Now, obviously it's a piece of information that you have to, so it's one of those features where you have to spend a bit of time kind of tracking your information, tracking your sleep to make sure you get the most reliable information. But ultimately, I think the way that information is presented doesn't feel massively useful, and it's lacking something like the training readiness feature on Garmin's watches to really kind of make it a more simplified, useful metric to have. Because at the moment, I don't think the way that HRV and that recovery information is handled is very useful. It's a good start, but I think ultimately it needs to get a lot better to become a bit more useful. And I think that would be laid against a lot of the training analysis that you're getting on the Suunto watch, on and off the watch. Yeah, so those are the 3 things I've not absolutely loved about the Suunto Race.
So like Coros watches, the Suunto Race uses combined controls. You have the touch screen and you've got these 3 buttons, one doubling as a digital crown here. In the main, these are responsive and easy to use on the move, but I've always found Suunto's navigation the least intuitive of the major watch brands. And I think that's still the case here. It's not always immediately obvious when it's a button press or a back swipe or a scroll. As you get deeper into the menu, sometimes it's hard to know where you're at. I've also found the software somewhat laggy. The raise to wake is often sluggish. The touchscreen isn't as snappy as the Polar Vantage V3 or the Forerunner 965. And moving around the menus is often, and all the data is often frustratingly slow. Sometimes you're really waiting, particularly if you try and do anything particularly fast. So that's not great. The second thing I'm not so sure about is I had a real struggle to get the strap connected to the watch. It's got swappable straps, but I had to take a knife to mine to budge this one of the spring pins to get it on. And there are much better ways to do this. I like Garmin's got the little quick release. I'm not a fan of the thick silicone strap either, or this hook fastening mechanism that I found very hard to get placed well down. Even the cheaper Coros Pace 3 has clocked the benefits of a nylon strap for fit and comfort, and I would much prefer that. Another smallish detail, but something else I found annoying when we're talking about that digital crown. This digital crown is really quite big and protruding, and I found it often caught my skin. There's not enough clearance here, and that made it fiddly to use. The Apple Watch, I think, gets around this by sort of housing it better and giving it a little bit more clearance than you have here. It sort of was just a bit frustrating. A much bigger issue is heart rate. I've been less than convinced with the optical heart rate here. I've put it up against the Polar H10 chest strap, the Vantage V3 optical sensor, and the Forerunner 965 optical sensor, and even the £400 Frontier X2 chest strap. Now, on the slow, steady runs, the Suunto Race had a tendency to lag and then lurch higher than the chest strap. There was a bit of drift. During pace-changing interval sessions and runs where I shifted the gears more, I also had the somewhat inevitable delay with the optical sensor from this. Now, where optical sensors can struggle, it did. There was a big delay compared to the Vantage V3, and the spikes, lags and surprising lows were a bit worrying. Even on long, slow, steady runs, the Suunto just seemed to respond much slower. That said, if you want accurate heart rate, get a chest strap, and with the price that you're paying for the Race, which is way below the Garmin and Polar, you can actually afford to get a good one and improve the data overall and nullify that problem altogether.
So now 3 things I didn't love. The first one is that there was no period tracking that I could find, no female health tracking, no pregnancy tracking on this watch. I couldn't find an app or a widget to download to the watch, and I would miss having that on my wrist. Obviously this is only for female runners, but I think Garmin do it really well. Apple have added it to their watch. You can now use your skin temperature for both of those watches, as well as just an algorithm where you're tracking your periods. Comparing this to the 265, I would go for the 265 because for me, I like to know where I am in my cycle because I think it affects my training. So that's not available. That's not to say it won't be in the future, but I couldn't find it in my testing and I did think it was missing. Second thing I'd have to add is it's quite tricky to add heart rate sensors or any kind of other sensor to this. I tried to connect a heart rate monitor and my turbo trainer to the watch and it was really fiddly. It took me quite a long time, and one of the main reasons that is because it doesn't name what the sensor is, so it's really difficult to connect anything to the watch. Finally, from a smartwatch perspective, obviously you don't buy a running watch to use as a smartwatch, but I kind of think if you're spending £389, £400 on a watch, you want to wear it 24/7, and this is definitely lacking in a few smartwatch features that we see on most Garmin's now on the market. There's no offline music, so you can't put music onto the watch, can't put podcasts onto the watch, and there's no option to make contactless payments from your wrist using this. Again, it's not something that everyone even wants on their watch, but I think it is worth mentioning, and it is something that I think I would miss if I was leaving Garmin, moving to Suunto. Is something that I would miss being able to pay from my wrist.
My verdict is that this is an absolutely cracking watch. I think Suunto's done a fantastic job here. You've got a great screen, lovely maps, great GPS, solid training analysis through Training Peaks, really impressive battery life, great materials, all at a really good price. Like, it's fantastic value. It's the best value AMOLED watch I'd say out there, and if your focus is really on things like build quality and battery life, the Suunto Race is certainly one of the top options on the market from any brand. I obviously had quite a few dislikes with it when I had that section, but all of those are relatively minor compared to the great stuff you get on the watch. And as a sports tracker, as a pure sports tracker, it does a really fantastic job on all the most important fronts. Like heart rate accuracy, we can debate whether that's a really important front, because I would always use a chest strap, and I think this is a very bad optical heart rate sensor, but I would always fix that immediately with any watch with a chest strap, and then everything else, it does a really good job. The price is just really smart, I think, because in this top-end watch market with maps and multi-band GPS and lovely screens and stuff like that, Garmin's been pretty dominant, and the ways to compete with that are to add all the features that Garmin has, or to compete on price. Now, Suunto's added, I think, the key features that Garmin has in that multi-band GPS and the maps and the battery life and the AMOLED screen. I think those are the most important ones to pick from Garmin's range. It's not gone after things like smart features and hasn't really got the advanced navigation tools that you get from Garmin, but that's okay. And then they've undercut them on price. And that was where the Vertical went wrong, I think, because I thought the Vertical was a very good watch from Suunto, but really expensive. So what Suunto's done is undercut Garmin, and it's done it also with exceptional build quality, with the sapphire display and that titanium bezel you can get, or even the steel bezel. And that just makes it a really hard watch to compete with the Suunto Race, because in its price bracket, the only watches that really can compete with it, I think, are older Garmin's that have come down in price. Like if you got something like the Epix 2 or Pro on a good deal in Black Friday and brought it down near the price of it, then you're in a conversation. But at its price on RRP, the Suunto Race is fantastic value. I think it's a really outstanding watch, and there's nothing else there that can really beat it. Then if you just compare on performance alone, I think the two or three big watches that really compete with it from Garmin, you've obviously got the Forerunner 965, which hasn't got the build quality, hasn't got the sapphire display of the Suunto Race, and is a little bit more expensive, but then does outdo it on things like the navigation tools, the smarts, the music storage. I prefer the training analysis, the more detailed training analysis on Garmin you get with training readiness, and it's got a better heart rate monitor as well. And obviously the Epix Pro is the same, you get the same. Then you do get the build quality that you get here with the Suunto, but you are paying a lot higher price for the Epix, but you do get a built-in flashlight as well. And Garmin, I still think, is better on quite a few features, and it certainly has a slicker user experience. But like I say, Suunto Race is cheaper. Polar Vantage V3, I think the Suunto Race is a clear winner in that little comparison. We talked about it in the Polar Vantage V3 review as well. The Suunto Race does everything that the Polar does as well or better, including GPS accuracy being slightly better. It's cheaper, it's got better battery life, better build. I'd say the Suunto Race is the better watch of those two for sure. So like I say, the Suunto Race at its price point, I think, is very hard to beat. Even comparing it to more expensive watches like the Garmin's, the 965 and the Epix Pro, there are some areas that make the Suunto more attractive. Like it's got the longer individual activity battery life, it's got the hardier design than the Forerunner 965, and it is a fair bit cheaper. So well done, Suunto. I think this is a great watch. I think this is one of the top options in the market. If you're just looking for a hardy, long-lasting watch with very accurate multiband and an AMOLED screen, Suunto Race is the cheapest way to do that. And quite rare in this bracket, I think, to have a category where the easy answer isn't just to get a certain Garmin. I think if you do get a certain Garmin and you pay a bit more and you get the Epix Pro and you get the Forerunner 965, I think they are still slightly better watches, but the Suunto does beat them in some areas, and it certainly beats them on price. So yeah, fantastic.
So my verdict then, well, Suunto has made some big leaps forward here. They've also been very smart on price, and by that I mean they've made it cheaper than the AMOLED rivals that are out there. So even if you opt for the pricier titanium model, the Race is still a big chunk cheaper than the Garmin Forerunner 965 and the V3. And though it's maybe not as rounded or as complete in terms of design and features as either of those two watches, Suunto has kind of done a Coros pace here and put it at a price that makes choosing between this and those other watches far harder. It's a much closer call if you're on a budget. And with the stainless steel, you're getting a lot of watch here for under £400. Would I recommend it over a Garmin Forerunner 965 for all out capabilities? Probably not really. The Garmin design, UI, app, infrastructure, features, all of that stuff are simply better delivered. It's probably a closer call against the Polar Vantage V3, but I think I'd still prefer the Polar overall. But if you're looking for a more affordable option than those two, this is a very good watch that can certainly hold its own, generally speaking. And if that price drops any lower in 9 months' time, this will enter into big bargain territory.
So then my verdict, this is an amazing watch for the price. For £389, this is a brilliant watch. You're getting a lot for your money here. The AMOLED screen, the offline mapping, all of the running features you could need. It is a great watch. I've been really surprised by it. I think I've always veered towards Garmin over Suunto. I've never really loved Suunto's watches, and I have been pleasantly surprised when testing this watch. That said, for me personally, there'd be a few things that I would miss if I was switching from Garmin to Suunto for this watch. That would be the female health tracking, it would be the smartwatch features, like being able to make contactless payments or listen to music from the watch. They're all missing at the moment, and I think I would miss them if I was making that switch.
So my verdict on the Suunto Race from a pure running perspective is that when you consider what this watch can offer and compare it to the watches it's clearly aimed up against, so the Polar Vantage V3 and the Garmin Forerunner 965, the Suunto Race can absolutely hold its own in terms of that kind of pure run tracking performance. And when you consider that, whether you go for the stainless steel version or the titanium version that I've tested, it massively undercuts those two watches in terms of pricing as well, and in terms of what you're getting in features. Now, would I go for this watch over the Polar and the Garmin? Now, my thing here is, if Suunto had got the software absolutely nailed, and I mean in terms of performance point of view, then it would be a no-brainer for me. I think that in terms of the mapping, in terms of the kind of dual band performance, the battery life, there's everything here that you'd want from a running watch or a premium kind of multi-sports watch in general. That software side of things has really kind of let it down for me a little bit. I think I look at it against the Polar Vantage V3. I think the performance is a lot better in terms of interacting with that watch. You get a really good bright AMOLED display on there as well too. I think the approach of the training analysis and things like sleep tracking is done a lot better on the Polar Vantage V3, and that would be reasons for me, on top of its kind of dual band mode as well. And the general kind of feeling of the Polar watch, just that is a watch I would probably, you know, it costs more, but I probably would still go for that. The Garmin Forerunner 965, what you're getting there, I think, again, you're getting much slicker working kind of software. I think in terms of a general smartwatch point of view, it offers a little bit more as well too. And then the training analysis as well, I just feel like the Garmin kind of handles those things a little bit better than the Suunto Race. I think the other way to look at the Suunto Race is you look at it when, you know, pricing is actually compared better to something like the Forerunner 265. The Forerunner 265, that's an AMOLED display as well too. You're not getting the offline maps you get on the Suunto Race, but you are getting, I think, the software just feels and runs a little bit nicer. It's maybe not got the same level of protection and kind of design materials to give that extra protection either. You know, you're getting a little bit more in terms of smartwatch features on the Garmin Forerunner 265, and I think the training analysis on the 265 is very good as well too. That's the main thing for me. If Suunto had really kind of nailed the software side of things, performance side of things, then it would be a much easier decision to go for it over the Garmin and the Polar. I just think if I had to pick between this and the 265, I would still probably edge towards the 265, but even without that kind of full mapping support, the Polar and the Garmin, I would be going for the Polar and the Garmin, even though they're more expensive, because I think if I'm going in for a, you know, premium multi-sports running watch, I want that performance and that software to run nice and smooth as well. I think that's just a minimum kind of expectation of how, when you're spending that amount of money, that performance is there as well too. For me, definitely the best Suunto running watch I've used, alongside the Suunto Vertical. The AMOLED display has been a success in terms of adding it here, and I hope that Suunto continue that trend and offering that good value for money at that top end. But ultimately, I think for me, I would still be leaning towards going for one of those other watches, and also the kind of similarly priced Garmin Forerunner 265 as well too. So a very good Suunto running watch, but it's not quite the full package for me just yet, but it's definitely a lot to like here. Okay, so there you have it. That is our multi-tester verdict on the Suunto Race. Now, if you've got any questions about this watch or other watches that you want to see it compared to, we've probably talked about the ones you probably want to know how it compares or how it kind of lives up against, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos, and yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.